Hi, welcome back to Battleboards and another movie on a project. Today we're going to be looking at quite an unusual board for Warhammer Crusades of Fire League, which isn't a game that I've ever heard of, but it's quite a unique board, and the approach that I took to it was quite different. So I hope you enjoy watching this movie, and thanks very much for watching. Before we start looking at the construction of the board, let's have a look at the virtual 3D design I produced. This is a great way of experimenting with the design to see how it would work out in reality. I first produced a design that will eventually be used as a digital print, and then placed the planets, which were made of MDF, over the top. The game is similar to Risk, so basically each planet is taken over by the player. Each player puts counters over the planet's surface until he gains control of it. I designed these little perspex platforms to hold the counters. These would eventually be laser cut out of clear acrylic. As you can see, the design is quite complicated and has the ability to have other items added. As part of the design, I've also added in extras, spaceships and even an asteroid field. After the design is completed, I can render out these images and send them to the client. This gives the client a really good idea of what the actual board will look like before I even start it. So now the design's completed and the client's happy, I then can proceed to the actual manufacturing of the boards. Okay, before we really begin, we're going to have a look at the main board. The main board I've had specialist made by a shop fitting company. I wouldn't attempt to make something like this myself. My carpentry is certainly not up to the sort of standard, so I decided to just go ahead and get it made with a hardwood surround on a plywood backing. It's also got these very nice struts on the back, which are split battens, so basically the whole board can be hung vertically on a wall. And then also what I've done is put magnets on the bottom of each of the planets, which again I've had specially made, so they would magnetically connect to the board, so when it's raised up in a vertical position, the planet should sit nice and tight onto the actual board itself. Okay, as with a lot of my projects, I've never done this before. This is completely unique. A lot of my projects are that I have to sort of work out the best way to get over problems and find solutions. So this surface is actually going to be covered with a plastic vinyl print, so I'm not too worried about what the surface looks like, although I don't want to obviously go rusty underneath the print. Once the print's on, it should protect the surface so it won't go rusty. So I'm going to use this Cure Rust, Hammerite Cure Rust, just to prevent any further rust occurring, and also this will treat the rust that's actually on the sheet itself. I've sanded that down. I'm just going to give it a coat of filler primer. This will help smooth it out even more and get rid of any fine scratches in the metal. You don't want to lay this on too thick. You want to literally lay it on quite thin and let each layer dry. It dries pretty quick. Started adding the filler primer on slowly, and now I'm going to wet and dry it down. Now wet and dry, bizarrely enough, with the filler primer works better with water, so I'm just going to add water to the surface, which helps the sandpaper glide over the actual filler primer. And then what's actually happening is the filler primer is breaking down into the water and producing a filler, which helps smooth out any imperfections. So you just need to build that surface up. Now because we've got steel underneath, we don't want the water penetrating back into the steel, because it will then end up going rusty again. So we need to get all of that water off. On the safe side, I think it's best to have a black background so there's no light flooding back through. So I'm just going to give this a coat of matte spray as well. Okay, so I'm fairly happy with that. It's nice and smooth. I can't see any imperfections in it, so I think I'll probably just leave it like that now. Once the print is over the top, that's going to cover up the whole thing anyway, so that's pretty much it, ready for the printers. Okay, so the board's gone to the printers and now come back, and they've printed the surface. So we'll just have a little look at how that's turned out. I think it's turned out really well. So that's the actual printed surface completed. So the detailing of that looks really good. Okay, so this is a close-up look at the print, which has come out fantastic. It showed up all the detail that I put in the Photoshop document. It's also had a matte laminate coating over the top, which will protect it whilst being played on. So, okay, this is the completed planet, Corvus Majoris, and that would magnetically connect to the board. And so when it's in its vertical position, it still hangs there, which is really good. I think that works really well. So we'd now take a closer look at how the actual development of the planet came about and the work that goes into those. Okay, let's have a closer look at some of the planets before I start them. The planets come in two forms. Some have electronics in, so they have this small sort of plate that lifts off where I can hide some lighting, and some don't. They're just slightly lower, which gives the whole table a bit of sort of undulation. So we need to start finishing these off. So the first thing I'm going to concentrate on is the inside or the bottoms, which have been made from the MDF rings. So you've got raw MDF showing on the edge here, which is always a tricky thing to paint because it's quite rough and it absorbs the paint quite quickly. So I'm going to coat this in some of my resin first and sand that down before painting them, and that should help. Just going around the cut MDF and sealing it with the resin, this will help with the paint later on, because cut MDF is quite porous and it doesn't take the paint very well at all. Okay, I'm going to do the same with the edges of the planets, or the underneath of the planets. I'm going to give them a wet and dry over the resin. Okay, now it's the same process for the underneath of the planets. Just going to give them a coat of filler primer and then start sanding that back. Okay, this is the bottom of Corvus Majoris. Before I do the top surface, it has a removable plate, so I can get inside and mount the battery and the other electronics to power the lighting. So that's really good. I wouldn't have attempted to make this. This has been professionally made by a shop fitting company and all machined out of MDF, and has a very nice plate that fits into the top, so I'm really pleased with the way they've made that. Okay, so I've installed all the electrics into Corvus Majoris, which you can see here. It's a fairly simple circuit consisting of a battery unit, a small switch which penetrates the actual side of the sort of disc, and some small LEDs that light up the fibre optics, which I don't know if you can just see, they're just lit up quite nicely. They're ready to go through to the planet's surface. So that was all well and good, but what I had to do was come up with a solution to connect the small LED to the fibre optic strands, which isn't as easy as it looks when you start looking at it. So I did come up with a solution which I thought worked really well, so I thought I'd let you into that, how I did that. So I basically used the heat sink, or the heat wrap that you use to insulate the cabling, to actually bond these two sections together. Okay, the first thing I did was work out how many sort of fibre optic cables that I actually wanted, elements that I wanted. Then I take one short length of heat shrink, and I feed that into, or feed the fibre optics actually into the actual heat shrink as much as I can get in, making sure they all come out the other end like so. Okay, the next thing I did was take my soldering iron and run that along the heat shrink, so that's actually melting it onto the actual strands, which is going to hold the strands together in one position, or one piece. And then snip off the excess you have a nice neat sort of gathering. And then the next process is to do the same process over the actual LED itself. Okay, so I've got my two LEDs set up, which are linked together, and then I'm going to slip on a large piece of the heat shrink over the top of both the light and its cabling, and then I'm going to insert the other cabling, the other fibre optics that I've already set up with the heat shrink into that hole as well. So basically you're bonding the two sections together, and then using a heat source, which I tend to find it's easier to use the soldering iron to actually melt that heat shrink round both. Okay. And that seems to form a really nice bond between the two, and reduces any light escaping, so you get the maximum amount of light through the ends of the actual fibre optics. Okay, now that's both joined together, and you can see it's formed a fairly good bond, so it's not going to fall out accidentally whilst moving the planet around. And the only other thing I had left to do was to figure out how to mount these actually into the planet themselves. So I decided to experiment with this with some of the foam that I use. These will just simply press into the slots that I've made into the foam and just hold those securely within the planet, so they just don't rattle around. So I don't know if you can see that. So that just keep them nice and sort of together. And then this piece of foam gets bonded actually into the planet. Okay, so I've put them back into the planet and going to give them a test. And I don't know if you can see that, but they've all lit up lovely. So the next thing to do would be just to drill through the base after the surface has been completed, and then poke the fibre optics up through the planet's surface where I need them. Clearly you have to be a bit careful with that, because the battery is obviously quite tightly packed into this one, so there's not a great deal of surface area for these to go up through, but I'm sure it'll be a great effect when I've finished it. Okay, that's the planet surface finished, and when you turn on the fibre optics they light up beautifully, and it gives gives the planet's surface and the model a really good sort of wow factor. The only thing I discovered was that the fibre optics, although they're very small, about 1 mil in diameter, they're still quite large for the actual city. I wanted to give you the impression that the city was only just sort of lit. So I found this sort of trick of actually reducing the size of the actual light coming through by just touching a bit of black paint actually onto the fibre optic, and that way you can control how large that fibre optic it is, and it's really quite a clever way of reducing the size of the fibre optic sort of light coming through. So you can see some of these lights are a bit bright, so I'm just going to, with the light on, just going to touch a bit of black acrylic across the light, and that will make it almost a pinprick. Hi, thanks very much for watching. It was quite an unusual project to work on, so I hope you've enjoyed that and it's given you some inspiration and some tips on things that you wouldn't normally tackle. So thanks very much for watching that and for subscribing, and see you next time.